Hello and welcome to ThoughtCast, the SPJIMR podcast, a conversation about business and leadership between a corporate head and an academic. Today's ThoughtCast episode is a special one. We have with us one of the top business leaders of our country, Mr. Sanjiv Mehta, who's the chairman and managing director of Hindustan Unilever, India's largest and most successful FMCG company. Mr. Mehta has been with Unilever for 28 years, and during the last 19 years, he has led businesses in different parts of the world. He also heads Unilever's business in South Asia, which has a turnover of around 6.5 billion euros as president South Asia. He's also member of the Unilever Leadership Executive, which is Unilever's global executive board, which runs Global Unilever. Talking to him today is leadership guru Mr. R Gopalakrishnan, who himself worked with Unilever for over 3 decades and retired as vice chairman. He was on the board of Tata Sons and is now an acclaimed author and speaker. He's also an executive-in-residence at SPJIMR. Over to you, RG.
Thank you very much, Vinita. As always, a great pleasure to be here, and the pleasure is enhanced when I'm talking to an accomplished colleague of mine, Sanjiv Mehta, but more importantly, a friend. So, Sanjiv, welcome on the show.
Thank you, sir. To the audience, greetings. And there is, it's a very special day because in many ways I'm speaking to my guru, RG. RG incidentally was the first chairman that I worked under when I joined Unilever. So it's a very special day for me.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here, and I know I'm shooting the bullet ahead of time, but I would like to congratulate you on your proposed award of the JRD Tata Corporate Leadership Award. If I'm your guru, then it makes me very, very happy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so Sanjeev, this podcast series is a terrific initiative that is started by SP Jain Institute. And on their behalf, I would like to thank you for taking part because really it's going to be heard by a lot of young people, not just the young people who are studying in the SP Jain, but their cohorts. And a lot of our young people are exceptionally bright, if I may say so. They're brighter than many of us were at their age, but they're in great need of guidance. And what they're hoping to get out of this conversation is out of narration of the experience of people like yourself, some guidance as to how they might chart their ship. So please feel free to narrate stories and incidents. And if I may cue you to begin with, instead of going in the standard autobiographical way of saying who you are, I am aware that you joined after doing your chartered accountancy, you joined the Union Carbide, and you were put through the deep end of the pool, as it were, by being assigned to Bhopal. And you worked in Carbide for some years and then came to Arabia when I met you for the first time. Can you tell us a little bit about those days so that the audience gets to soak in who is Sanjeev Mehta, the real person, other than being the chairman?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, RG. Union Carbide was my first job. Incidentally, when I finished my chartered accountancy, I had zeroed in on two companies, the Unilever group of companies and Union Carbide. Both incidentally started with the big U. Those were the days when we did not have one entity of Unilever in India. We had HLL, we had Lipton, we had Brook Bond, we had Dumduma, we had Ponds. I remember going through the process and what that time the Unilever companies were looking at whether I would be interested in joining Lipton, which was based in Kolkata. Now, I love Bengalis, but I'm a pure Mumbaikar, and Union Carbide was headquartered in Mumbai. So when I got the offer from Union Carbide, based in Mumbai, I picked it up. And those days, this were two companies of near equal size. And Union Carbide was a conglomerate. It had various divisions. It had the consumer products or the battery products division, the marine products division, the chemicals products division, the carbons and metals division, and the agri products division. So I had just started working at Union Carbide and had been in the company for a few months when the ill fated Bhopal tragedy happened. And the Bhopal Gas Tragedy is still referred to as one of the biggest industrial disasters in the world, compared to the likes of Chernobyl and the 3 Mile Long Island accident in the US. And I still remember vividly when I was plucked out and sent to Bhopal to be part of the small crisis team. And this was a crisis of huge magnitude. A lot of people had lost their life. And it was a very small crisis team reporting to the chairman of Union Carbide. And I still remember when I landed in Bhopal for the first few days when I used to visit the factory, it used to be under police protection because the sentiments in the city were running very high. And while the crisis was of huge magnitude, RG, I believe a boy became a man in Bhopal. And I saw at very close quarter the corporate responsibility that comes into big corporations, the importance of safety. After that, there is no meeting which I start without first talking about safety. It's something which has been ingrained in me, is how to manage the environment, is how politics gets mixed with business, and many other facets. So I was in Bhopal for a year and a half, and then I was picked up and brought back to Bombay, and I was made the commercial head of a chemicals and plastic business. I still, the lessons that I learned while in Bhopal are still deeply ingrained in me. And over the years, I have faced several crises in my life. And I believe Bhopal also, in many ways, made me ready to face crisis. So, whether it was the Arab Spring when I was running North Africa, Middle East, or the huge outcry against the Western corporations after the Gulf War when I was chairman of Unilever Bangladesh, or the demonetization, or the changes that came with GST, or now with Covid-19. I think the Bhopal crisis in many ways shaped me and has readied me for many jobs which came in later. And then later on, when Union Carbide decided to leave India, it is serendipity that my path took me to Unilever again, and I joined Unilever in Arabia. And Mr. Gopalakrishnan was the chairman, the first chairman. That was the time when Unilever had come onshore. We had businesses in Arabia, in the Middle East, for many years, but they were run as export businesses. And this was the moment when the businesses came onshore. And it was such a fabulous experience working in a truly multinational environment where we had managers from nationalities from all over the world working. And it was, Gopal, if you remember, it was, the feeling was very much similar to a startup.
Yep.
Though we didn't use the word startup then, but I think that's what we were in. Setting up new factories, new distribution arrangements, getting into new categories. So it was a very exciting time when I joined Unilever. And I still look back very fondly to my initial days under Gopal's leadership when I joined Unilever.
How wonderful! That's you bring back all those memories. Since I also lived through them, it was my first experience as a chairman. But two things I'm pulling out of what you're saying, which I would ask you to elaborate a little bit. The first is I'm drawing a principle from what you said about your experience in Carbide, that it's a middle class virtue that you learn more from adversity than from prosperity. And Carbide provided you the adversity from which you learned a lot. And the second principle I learned is, having had that adversity, it was a great joy to be out in the air of growth in Arabia. Have I got the two pictures
Oh,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. I think just like fire is the test for gold, adversity is the test for mankind. And at the same time, the oxygen that you get is from growth.
Right.
If I look at my people, the spring in the step, it comes from growth.
Terrific. So, adversity and prosperity come in cycles. They take their turns and they rotate like the Kala Chakra.
So true. Nothing moves in a linear fashion.
Absolutely. That's a great introduction for the audience to know the Sanjiv Mehta, the person behind the chairman whom they are listening to now. Sanjeev, you and I have on and off met each other for many years, and you have worked in several countries. I remember you moved from Dubai to Bangladesh to Philippines, back to Dubai. What was it like to work with so many nationalities?
Yeah, I think one of the joys of working for a true blue blooded multinational company like Unilever is the joy of working in different nations. And, I had a wonderful privilege, as Gopal said, working in Dubai, which is really a melting pot for people from different parts of the world. And then going to Bangladesh, which in many ways is similar to the eastern part of India. Then going to Philippines, which is a very different culture, and then coming back to Middle East again. But this time I was running the business in North Africa, Middle East, and then after 21 years coming back to India, my own country. And, the nuances, while there are certain fundamental beliefs and traits which run across cultures, but there are many aspects which are very peculiar to a certain part of the world. And so you have to be very tuned into it. I'll give you a couple of examples, if I may, Gopal.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Please do. Please do.
Like in the Middle East, a lot gets done based on relationships.
Right. Vasta.
So if you go and meet, if there is a meeting, and if you go and straight away pick up a point what you have come to discuss, it will never work. Yeah. First, you have to sit down, then have discussion over endless cups of tea, build trust and relationship, and then come to the point. And once you have built trust, then the people, they trust you completely. I'll give you one wonderful example. You will recall, Gopal, that we have a great partnership in the Middle East with the Benzaga family.
Yes, of course.
They are strategic partners. And during Gopal's days, we had entered into a laundry category, but that's a marketing story in itself. We, after a few years, we exited. And then when I took over as the chairman of North Africa and Middle East, and Unilever had a new chairman in 2010, in 2009, in Paul Polman. He took over towards the end of 2008. And we again started working on re entering the laundry category. So for a couple of years, we did a huge amount of research and built our strategy. And then we were ready to launch. This was in 2013 when my next move of moving as the CEO of India was announced. But my boss Paul Pullman, he told me that Sanjeev, before you go, you need to sell this re-entry of laundry strategy to our partners, Benzagas. And this entailed a 100 million euro investment.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and 100 million euro investment would mean that Gonzagas had to shell out 50 million euros was not a very easy thing. So I remember this was sometime around July of 2013 when I called up Mohammed and said, Mohammed, I'm coming to. I used to go there every month for the famous Gonzaga Unilever partnership meetings, but I thought I'll have a special meeting for this agenda. And all the brothers were there. And I went there in a typical Unilever fashion with a PowerPoint deck. I started making a presentation to them. And I took them through what the business case is and why we are talking about re entering and what it means for the partnership and what it means for the Gonzagas. And Mohammed asked me, Sanjeev, if you were not leaving as chairman of North Africa Middle East, would you have still proposed this investment?
Right.
And I looked Muhammad in his eye and said, absolutely. And Muhammad, what did he say? Go ahead. So 100 million euro investment, it took me just 30-35 minutes because of the trust that we had developed.
Wonderful. Great
No
story.
further questions, no detailed analysis. I said, go ahead and do it.
Great partners for Unilever. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amazing partnership. And this is a partnership which you will recall Gopal started in the late 1920s. Then I'll talk about another cultural nuance, which is of Philippines. Now, Philippines is a very interesting society. It is amalgam of church and Hollywood come together. So the Philippines was ruled by the Spanish people for many years. So it's a very, very Christian society in many ways. And it was also perhaps the only colony of the Americans. So there was, for 50 years, the Americans ruled Philippines. And that's where the Hollywood comes in. I haven't come across a Filipino who can't sing and dance. Yeah, but they are very, very Catholic. But an important nuance about Filipinos is that for them, they are very, very sensitive to loss of face. You cannot criticize them in meetings. Forget criticizing them in public. If you criticize them in public, it is as if the earth is opening underneath them. And I remember my first meeting as chairman of Philippines, and the whole board was there, and I was going through my initial induction. And I remember one director presenting to me, which I thought was crap, and I said, that looks crap to me. There was a pin drop silence in the room, as if I have stabbed someone. And I could sense it immediately, the dynamics that, oh, this hasn't gone well. So, of course, rest of the meeting, I was very careful. But at the end of the day, there was a very sensible, my head of HR, and she comes to me and sits and talks about many things and politely raises this subject that, I said crap, and the other person who was presenting felt very offended. And so from then onwards, I would bite my tongue, hold the edges of the table tightly, but I would keep smiling during the meetings. And if I had something tough to say or I did not agree, then I would call the person in private and talk to him.
But that's generally good practice anyway, whether you're in the
It
Philippines or
is. But
anywhere.
I'll tell you something. In other culture, like in my board here, we have fierce debates.
Right.
Yeah, and telling someone that I don't agree or what you're presenting is crap is crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't do it in that culture. Clear no no.
Right.
So there are, look at it from another lens. Things like human dignity, yeah, is love for the children. All those are something which transcends cultures and geopolitical boundaries.
Right.
But each country has their own nuances,
Right.
and what an expatriation teaches you is that you have to be in sync with those culture of different places. Then only you are able to succeed.
Bravo, that's very well put because many of our youngsters at schools of management, particularly in SPJIR, are looking forward to an international career. And it takes something to be a global manager. It's really worth it, but it doesn't happen automatically. So your stories were very, very interesting. Sanjeev, just switching to, I've often heard you say, use the word de-averaging. And I think I know what you mean by it, but I think it's an unusual terminology. So I thought, is there any particular incident that has influenced you to come to this
Yes,
term?
yes, Gopal.
Tell us.
Yeah, it was in October of 2013 when I came back to India to become the CEO of Hindustan Unilever. And like I said before this, I was the chairman of the MENA region, which encompassed 20 countries from Oman in the east to Morocco in the west. And as is typical for a Unilever chairman, when I came in, I traveled very extensively for the first few months. My wife, when I was still in Dubai, our daughters were studying in the US. I was all by myself here. And so I traveled the length and breadth of the country, meeting different stakeholders, consumers, suppliers, analysts, shareholders, and something which I knew intuitively, but the penny did drop that there was more in common amongst the 20 countries of MENA than the 29 states of India.
Right.
Yeah, and the diversity of India is simply unparalleled.
Right.
In MENA, we had one predominant language, one predominant religion, and one predominant culture. And when I moved around India, of course, the living standard measurement, the way we kind of measure the consumers, we break them up. The spread is very different in different states. The media consumption habits are diverse. Competitive context is, the intensity is varied across the length and breadth of the country. The beauty quotient is very different. What constitutes beauty in Tamil Nadu will be very different from what constitutes beauty in North India or in Northeast, and the languages are different, the festivals are different. So the penny was very, it dropped that India is not a homogeneous entity, and this led us to famously craft a strategy, what is called the winning in many Indias, or WIMI as we call it.
Right.
So what we did, Gopal, is basically we broke up the country into 15 consumer clusters.
Mm.
And for us, it's not just a geographical classification, it's a philosophy. It is a change in mindset
Mm.
that has enabled us to look at India with very different lens, craft strategies which are unique to a cluster, and have enabled us to set up structures which act on local opportunities, thereby providing us with a very significant competitive edge. Today, our formulations and blends are different for different clusters. The brands that we have need not be national brands, they would be specific for a different cluster. What this has done very clearly, it has enabled us to de-average India. And for a big country like India, yeah, you cannot be looking at India as one entity. And the principle of de-averaging as opposed to averaging has now seeped deep into HUL. And if there is any business, for instance, they want to enter India, it would be a fatal mistake if they make the decision based on average GDP per capita. Yeah, so you have to very clearly look at it with a de-average lens. Even if your percentages of your target consumer may be small, the absolutes might turn out to be pretty large. And so, one of the principles that is very clearly established: don't get carried away by the sins of averages. Look at de-averaging.
Fantastic. You remind me of the my days as the managing director of Brook Bond, when for the first time we proposed that the tea formulations will be different in different parts of India, although the brand is Brook Bond Red Label.
Oh, absolutely.
And somebody said
Absolutely.
this is complete madness. I said this was a food product; it's not a detergent. But now you're saying it is a philosophy; it's a way of thinking.
Yes. Yes.
That's quite a good
Absolutely.
marketing lesson for our young people to know. And maybe sometime SP Jain can you can nominate somebody to come and talk to the students about the principle of how de-averaging works. It will be a very good
Yeah.
lesson for them.
It does result in complexity, but it is a bit like a good cholesterol.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is like high density lipoprotein. It
yeah.
is something where you have to manage the complexity because it brings in disproportionate gains to you.
So you know what Europe did naturally because it was never averaged.
Yes,
We have averaged, and now you are having to de-average. I understand.
absolutely.
Wonderful. The second thing I've heard you sometimes refer to, not very often, is something called and.
Yeah.
What does
No,
that mean?
thank you. Thank you. Gopal, if you look at, we've had a very good journey in the last 7 years. And the market cap of HUL has moved from $17 billion to what is now $75 billion.
How much is the market cap of Unilever? It's about
It's,
130,
it's about, so we are nearly, now we are slightly more than 50% of Unilever's market cap.
Fantastic. Very good.
And, and people often ask me, Gopal, what was one thing that made a difference? Yeah, the reality is that there is never one thing. It is all about
Mhm.
and in business, we have to learn to manage many apparent contradictions. For a long period of time, you will recall that businesses thought that improvement in quality and reduction in cost cannot go together. In the 70s and 80s, the Japanese taught us through the automobile industry that we can improve quality and reduce cost at the same time. They brought in the concepts of TPM, the TQM, the JITs, and all this contributed towards this endeavor. At HUL, we embarked on what we call as the Big Q agenda. And the whole reason was that we launched it with a very same philosophy. Yeah, for instance, we invested in product superiority and at the same time ensured that we have a very aggressive savings agenda to ensure that our margins go up while our product superiority goes up. So this debate should not be about, for instance, scale or focus, but the debate should be where in the organization you need scale and where in the organization you need focus. So the debate has to move from either or to and. So it is not about functional superiority or brand purpose. It is about a brand having a purpose, living the purpose, and having product superiority. When you look at today's world, I think one of the things which business needs, the world needs, is to get away from procrastination and half measures. And how do we work towards flattening the climate curve? How do we take concrete actions so that we can better manage our water resources? And how do we ensure that we keep the plastic away from the environment? Now, people are also hesitant because they fear that costs would have to be incurred in the process. I believe, Gopal, we need to bring in the same mindset of the Japanese automakers of the 70s and 80s. And then we will be able to reduce the carbon emissions and at the same time reduce costs. Though I do accept that in initial period there might be some investments required. So we have to learn to manage the apparent contradictions, and we should not fall into the trap of either or, but look at and.
You articulated so well, but as you were talking, my mind is flying into other directions. Say, young people are very interested in leadership, and leadership is also a field. You have to be direct and tough with people at the same time. You must be kind, and you have to be insistent on discipline and time, and yet you must give them space for creativity. The same principle of and applies there as well. Don't you think so?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you have to be a backstage leader where you have to get into details about your, infinite details about your business. At the same time, you have to be a front stage leader where you have to come out with compassion. So you're absolutely right.
Wonderful. So, these are great lessons for those who are listening, our young friends, not only in about how to in the operations of the business, but also in terms of the quality of leadership and how to lead people. That what looks obviously as this or that, you have to ask yourself the question: is there an and solution? And very likely there is one. You just have to look harder for it. That's the message, right, Sanjeev?
Absolutely.
Now, the world is very complex. Everybody is very confused about COVID and the pace of change and technology. And very often, people use the word sense making. You have a view on sense making and some experiences there. Would you like to share that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Gopal, when it comes to defining leadership traits, people generally talk about strategic thinking, ability to change, communicate effectively, and so on. But when we have to work in a chaotic and ambiguous environment, the importance of sense making comes up. Let me dwell a bit more on it and also give an example. Around 2010, we had that 2010-11, we had the famous or infamous Arab Spring
Right, right.
in
Tunisia.
Middle
Started
East.
in Tunisia. Yeah.
Absolutely. It started from Tunis with the fruit vendor, and the entire region was up in flames. And a large part of the business was seriously impacted. One of the countries which was massively impacted was Egyptian business, and we had a big business in Egypt. And I remember our managing director calling up and saying that everything has come. And that was a very tough period, Gopal, because the law enforcement agencies, they had vacated the barracks. There can't be anything worse. Yeah, police had vacated the barracks. The whole city was up in flames. The whole country was up in flames. There was no banking system which was operating, etc. So it was terrible few weeks. And my managing director called me up, and we used to discuss everyday lengthy conversations of how we traverse this absolutely chaotic environment. And then I asked my MD, he was a fabulous guy, Khalid Fayed, an Egyptian. And I said, make an aggressive business plan. And Khalid said, you must be joking. I said, no, I'm not joking. I said, make an aggressive business plan because, all the people are ensconced in their homes and no one is getting out. The only thing they do is watch television. So Khalid said, our business is not running. We are not doing anything. What do we do with an aggressive business plan? I said, don't worry about it and make an aggressive business plan.
You're
So he
preparing
came,
for a COVID-19 situation.
so absolutely, absolutely. So he came back with a plan which was a few million euros more than what the base plan was. So I told Khalid, I'm not looking at a few million euros. Come to me with 15 and 20 million euros kind of aggressive plan. So he thought he was joking. So he started laughing. I said, Khalid, you don't worry. If we win, the credit is yours. If we don't, the responsibility is mine. I'll fund 15, 20 million from rest of the region. And Khalid went and made the plan, and we went aggressive with spending. When rest of the country was withdrawing spends, we kept improving the spend. While others were withdrawing distribution, we clearly improved on our distribution. And I remember during that period, most of the global multinationals used to attribute the global result impact based on the crisis in Middle East. And we grew double digit consecutively in 11, 12, 13 in Middle East. Yeah. Now, this is about making sense of a complex external world where the change is happening fast, where you need to update your understanding of shift in markets, shift in environment, shift in economy, competitive moves, shifts in technology. And this also was one of the reasons, Gopal, we had this reimagine HUL agenda, where for the last 4, 5 years, we've been investing significantly in data and technology.
Right, right,
Now, sense making involves pulling together disparate views to create a plausible understanding of the complexity around us. And
right.
then you test it to understand, or you refine it, or if necessary, you'd abandon it and start over. Now, sense making, as I say, it has been is very vital for survival of an organization in an ambiguous and chaotic world. Now, sense making is not a word which I have coined. Yeah, it was coined by Carl Weick way back in the 70s. And the thing is that the management teachers haven't picked it up. But I believe it is so critical, whether it is for making innovative products in FMCG or traversing through this kind of crisis. Sense making never leads to a flawless picture of what is happening. Let me make it clear. The world is uncertain, constantly changing, and our understanding will always have limits. And it is not about achieving omniscience, but it is about learning. It is about having an ability which will involve having a wide network, an ability to reach out to many stakeholders, listen, see patterns and complexity, and very importantly, think across polarities. Yeah, efficiency versus effectiveness, or safety versus starting up the economy. Therefore, one of the most important leadership traits, which has also come in very handy for us while we have been navigating this COVID-19 crisis, and which I believe every leader should develop, is this focus on developing a sense making.
Wonderful. You remind me, you back in the 70s, Shell, I think it was, who did an exercise in South Africa called scenario planning. It was an old management idea, but one of the HR guys picked it up and Shell perfected it. And today, scenario planning is taken as standard management lexicon. Maybe this is a hint to the SPJIN executive development people to develop a program on sense making and create that capability amongst Indian managers, since you speak so highly of the results that you've achieved, not only in Arab Spring, but also in COVID-19 and GST and so on and so forth back in India.
Oh, absolutely. And the world is going to be increasingly ambiguous with the advent of technology, with the threat of climate. And I think this is a trait which should certainly be developed in all managers. And SP Jain in India could perhaps take a lead in teaching people what sense making entails.
Great. We have some lovely ideas from this chat. Sanjeev, you and I could carry on for a long time, but our hosts may get tired. I just want to close with asking you to reflect. It's not a question. I'm asking you to reflect on something. I am also, my comment is also reflective. When I joined Hindustan Unilever in those days, back 55 years, 53 years ago, India used to account for 1% of the turnover, 0.5% of the profits. It is all in decimals. Today, you account for, I don't know, 12, 13, 14% of the revenue, and you just said 50% of the market cap. And you have a seat at the table, sitting in the Global Executive Council. Just share a little bit about your feelings on this and what is the special position that Hindustan Lever has in Unilever.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Gopal. Hindustan Unilever is now Unilever's second biggest company by value. And it is the largest company when you look at the volume or the throughput that goes in. And the biggest is US. But it's such a wonderful feeling that Unilever occupies such an important place in the amongst the community of nations when it comes to Unilever. And the only two countries which are represented on the global executive board are the US and India, which indicates the importance that Unilever has, Hindustan Unilever has in the world of Unilever. So one is the size and the growth, and we are also very importantly, Gopal, profit accretive to Unilever. But I think also, which is very important, is we have remained over the years provider of talent to the global Unilever, and in many ways we are the thought leader. And if you look at it from a lens that the world will keep shifting south and east, the importance of Unilever within Hindustan Unilever, within the Unilever world, will keep improving.
That's great. Sanjeev, it's been wonderful talking to you because what you have done this afternoon by sparing this time and talking with such a candor and vigor is to help, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of young people to think about careers, companies, marketing strategies, adapting to change, a whole wide range of subjects. It is an incredible amount of education for those who want to be educated. So, can I say on behalf of SP Jain, thank you so much for this. And we will be back to you to nominate one of your senior colleagues if we want to undertake any further work in any of these areas.
Certainly, sir, and it's been a real pleasure. And thank you, SP Jain, for inviting me, and very importantly, inviting me to share my thoughts with my guru.
Thank you, Mr. Gopalakrishnan and Mr. Mehta, for this very engaging conversation. You were listening to another episode of SPJIMR's ThoughtCast, produced by Bhumika Dwivedi, edited by Parth Thakkar, supported by Amulya, Fani, Vishav, and Kaushik. Thank you for listening.